If you're the wife or partner of a man that struggles with sexual addiction, have you ever wondered to yourself, should I stay or should I leave? Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. We have a full house today, and we're quite excited about it. We are here with Debbie Laaser, Elizabeth Hardesty, Beth Miller, Greg Miller, and on the phone, direct from Apple Valley, Minnesota, Susie Smidt. How's everybody this morning?
Wonderful. Doing well.
All right.
Very good. Thank you.
Greg, you want to start us out in how we're going to maneuver these waters?
Yes. Well, we are very glad to have y'all all here with us. And this podcast came out of a question that I often get from men, especially earlier in the journey. And that is, how can I anticipate what my wife's reaction is going to be? How do I understand if she's going to be able to stay or if she's going to leave? I know that so many of the men, their anxiety about what's going to happen with their marriage is so high. And this is such a significant topic that we're going to take 3 podcasts to talk about this. And so we are very glad that you are here and are able to be a part of this. One thing I just want to identify is the 4 women that are participating have all experienced betrayal. And through their own journeys, through their own experiences, they did decide to stay and to continue with the marriage. And we also know that that's not everyone's story. So as we begin the conversation, what are some of the factors that you're aware of that influence this decision?
And I want to just start out by saying not only have we, and I'm Debbie, by the way, Laaser, not only have we all experienced this journey ourselves, but today we're all counselors here at Faithful and True, and we work with women, we lead groups here, and we have a women's workshop that also supports them. So we come at it today from a lot of experiences and working with a lot of women, and I think actually this question came up through you, Beth, maybe my different perception than what I heard you start with, Greg, but the question is why would I stay? And we want to address that in terms of why is it so difficult to make that decision early on, because we know that it is. It's not an easy decision to make. So we have thought through pretty thoroughly some of the different dynamics that make it a difficult decision.
Right. Well, this is Beth Miller, and I think one of the things I would say right off the bat is you're not crazy if you're struggling to know what to do, because this is really challenging. Mm-hmm. And I made some uninformed statements before any of our story unfolded, such as, if Greg were ever to do X, Y, and Z, this is exactly what I would do. And that was really uninformed. I didn't have all the pieces. And what's true is we don't know what we'll do until it's your life, your story. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to say, you're not crazy if you're in a position and you're listening and you think, I am struggling to know what to do. This is challenging.
This is Susie Smidt, and I think back to those days, and I think of the shock and numbness that I encountered that was intense, and it felt like it was never going to end. And we could all say, well, this is a situation we've never been in before, never expected to be in, so of course we wouldn't know what to do. And that shock and numbness really put me in kind of a freeze mode for quite a while. So of course I didn't know what to do until I could get support and figure out how to get myself out of that.
Yeah, thanks, Susie. This is Elizabeth, and I can relate to that. I think for me too, it was like 1 minute I would be going in the direction of I know that I need to divorce. There's just no option, and then the next minute I would think, all those preconceived stories of God hates divorce and divorce is not an option, and just feeling really confused, really lost in terms of how do I make that kind of decision, feeling like I needed to make a decision in some ways, pressure from outside influences, and just feeling like I need to make a decision, and yet knowing I just can't right now. I'm not clear enough to make a decision. Mm-hmm.
So I would just add from my experience that what is true is I really loved Mark. I mean, we had been married already for 15 years, and knew each other 4 years prior to that, and there was so much I loved about him. I think it was almost hard for me to believe the people that brought him to me to tell me about what he was doing. I wasn't sure if I didn't want to like them or if I wanted to hate Mark or what. I was really confused, but what I knew was that it wasn't a straightaway answer. And, from research I've done a few years ago, this was a response of 75% of the women that they really loved their spouse. And it was confusing that they're now being presented with a part of him that isn't congruent with the person they've known him to be. And so that too creates a lot of confusion, I think, about what we might do now that we're in this situation.
I think one of the things that stands out to me is the absolute need to slow down, to be present, to tell yourself over and over, I have choices, I have options. One of the things that I'm so thankful for is somewhere in the early few months of our story, I began to realize that I had the freedom to leave and the freedom to stay. And when I began to realize that, there was this internal shift that I was so thankful for, because it allowed me to know that there were choices. I could pay attention to what I needed, what choices Greg was making, and knowing that I wasn't just locked in to one thing or another really created a sense of internal peace that allowed me to get grounded, to be wise.
I'm curious, Beth, whether there were those in your life who helped you spiritually to get to that place, because as I work with a lot of women, and as you know, as a Christian counseling center, the majority of our clients will claim that faith for themselves. Many of them are stuck with that they don't have a choice, that God hates divorce, that they, when they said their vows, they really committed to a lifetime no matter what was coming along. And so I think many of them don't feel like they have a choice. So how did you reconcile that for yourself?
That's a great question. And I absolutely had voices in my life telling me, on one hand, that I would need to forgive and forgive quickly. Within a matter of weeks, I had people telling me that. And I was a little dumbfounded at that response, knowing, there was no way I was going to be able to move through that. In fact, I don't even think that's forgiveness. I think moving through something like that so quickly is more about being codependent or fearful to believe that I couldn't live without the relationship, So there were absolutely people telling me that. On the other hand, there were also people telling me that the only option I had was to leave. Like, how in the world could I stay? And so, yes, to your question, Deb, thankfully, there were some people in my life that began to say, you don't have to make any decisions quickly. And I had, in terms of like biblical grounds, we use that phrase a lot. Yes, there had been unfaithfulness, so I had, quote, biblical grounds to leave. But I also had, like I said, this freedom to stay. That there could be a wise choice that I could make, and that I didn't have to just fall in line either way with what all these other voices were saying. In fact, that was important, that I did get quiet, right, and listen, not just to what all the loud voices were around me, but to get quiet and pay attention. And that was the wise counsel that I was given, was to get quiet.
I want to jump in and say, for me as well, I remember meeting with Susie for my very first session. And I just knew that I wasn't in a place where I could make that kind of large decision. I had 3 young children at home. It felt huge to make that kind of decision. And Susie asked me, would you be willing to just create a space of time where divorce is not an option, divorce is off the table. It doesn't mean it may not be, but for a period of time, can you just just get quiet? Can you just get still and just focus on your healing, focus on taking the next right step? Mm-hmm. And I loved that. It just gave me, I could just take a breath. It was like, okay, there's a place for me here. It's okay if I just take my time in this, if I just pull back, and I don't have to make any of those huge decisions right now. It didn't mean nothing was going to happen. I really embarked on my own journey here of healing and what does that even look like to move forward. But kind of surrendering those decisions around the marriage.
It could be that.
Funny you say that, Elizabeth. Oh,
go ahead, Susie.
It's funny you say that, Elizabeth, about time, because I both loved and hated that. You know, at some point, I think that was a thing that gave me great peace to begin to be able to allow myself permission to take the time I needed to get my head on straight and figure things out, and at the same time felt like the enemy at times because it felt so slow. Mm-hmm. And but for the most part, I think the good aspect of that began to win out, where I really felt like, okay, you know, this has been going on for 15 years of our marriage, and it's going to take us time to figure this out. And like Debbie said earlier, I really did love Russ, and I really wanted to continue a life with him, and I needed to discover whether that was going to be possible.
I think for so many of us, we have a lot of authority figures in our life, whether it's parents or really good friends, our pastors, teachers, who are all trying to tell us something when they see us in pain. Because I think for them, it's so uncomfortable to see someone in pain. It's one of the things that I think as humans we often do is start giving advice about how to get somebody out of pain as quickly as possible. So we're really running a different kind of course here when we ask ourselves to even remove ourselves from some of that advice giving and quiet ourselves. I think I always assume it's because we're listening for the Holy Spirit's direction within. And when we can quiet ourselves enough to hear that, we can begin to start figuring out our next steps rather than all the shoulds that might be coming from everybody else around us. And what is true is out in the world, we can get advice on all sides of this issue, and books on all sides, and even Christian books on all sides of this. So, that's really hard to sort through. And for most of us wives, we're great readers and researchers, I find, even more so than our spouses, generally speaking. And we're reading all kinds of stuff, and it's all conflicting. And then we got the voices coming from all these folks in our life. It's like, I get confused just saying what I'm saying right now, Like, how in the world could we make a decision?
One of the things that you just spoke to, Deb, was this idea of learning to, I think both of you and Elizabeth mentioned this idea of the next right step. And to me, that's a big piece of this, because when some huge discovery happens, it's understandable that we kind of race ahead in our mind to try to think, what do I need to do about this or that? Whether it's big decisions about staying in the marriage or what happens with the children, that sort of thing. And I think when we begin to slow down, we recognize all that I have to do right now is my next right step. I just have to take care of today. And the amazing thing about that is that when we take the next right step, it prepares us for the one after that. And discovery is so fascinating because there is this feeling of powerlessness, that we've been completely out of control of what's happened to us, right? And while we didn't have a choice about what's happened to us, we absolutely have a choice about what happens next. And that's the piece that really feels empowering. As we think about why would we struggle to know what to do? Well, we've been, out of the know of what's been happening, or someone else has been making choices, right, that have greatly impacted us. And part of becoming a wise adult is naming, I do have choices about how I respond and what happens next. And to me, that when I begin to get a glimpse of that, that felt so empowering.
Mm-hmm. I have a question. So what would you say to the woman who would say, I've known this all along, that I knew he struggled with pornography when we were engaged. My assumption it would go away. And so I know for the four of you, there was a big discovery. There was this time of chaos. What does it look like for the woman who maybe isn't surprised, but the surprise is it's still happening?
I think, Greg, for a lot of those women, they know aspects of what's going on. They thought that maybe it had stopped, and a lot of times I don't think those women also fully grasp the depth of the problem. So maybe there isn't the same kind of a shock that I had. There is at some point often a realization that the size of the problem, which can be disorienting too.
One of the things I was going to say, and I have worked with women with that exact situation, Greg, is that I think at some point when they're now faced with the decision about do I stay or why am I staying, why would I want to leave, it's really important to help them to understand what their belief system is about this. So I think we can shift the focus from the pornography or whatever's going on to what am I believing about this that keeps me stuck with where I am, or has my belief system changed so that now I'm feeling like I need to make a different decision to be congruent with myself. So it could be in the beginning, for instance, that a wife has a lot of tolerance for pornography because her belief system is, most everybody's doing this. And I hear that everywhere. My husband tells me that as well. Maybe she's looking at pornography for that matter, because a lot of people are. And it could be over time, though, her belief system shifts to, if he's still looking at this, then what I do believe is he's choosing these women or these experiences over me. And now it's becoming more painful. So it's really important to know what she's believing and for her to understand what she's believing. I think a lot of times we're driven by behaviors we're seeing, but we don't know why we're being driven and why we're feeling the way we are. And when we can explore the belief system, it makes sense then why we maybe need to make a different choice for ourselves.
And maybe, adding to that too, Debbie, I think I see it kind of in two ways, Greg, that I feel like our crash and burns happen. One is that new information just comes out of nowhere and our whole world is rocked. And I think for other clients, and somewhat for our story too, it was more of a buildup over time. It was just this perpetual growth of, and the pain. It's just, you reach your breaking point. And I think so to answer that question or to think about the women that come in here, I think it's just presenting that there's a different way. It doesn't mean it has to be divorce. It also doesn't mean that it has to stay this way. There's a different option. And so I think just trusting the process there too, like taking the next right step, there's still an invitation. Regardless of how we come in the door, I think there's still an invitation for it doesn't have to stay this way.
I think it's also good to validate for a woman who's been in that situation that in itself, even if it doesn't feel like some of the more catastrophic stories that we hear, that there is still very deep pain and brokenness when pornography is a part of the marriage, when it's an ongoing experience that they're having to wrestle with the husband over and over engaging in that, and the pain of discovering that, and the longevity of it is really chaotic.
Mm-hmm. In addition, I think what can also be true is our clients can have experienced a lot of different earlier life situations with pornography, infidelity, or whatever, as perhaps they've watched their parents struggle through issues. And it could be they've watched their mom respond in a certain way, which now that adds pain to they're in the same situation, and are they going to respond like their mom? And then they saw family situations get so painful, maybe eventually divorce or whatever. So I think the historical pain is really important to look at. And when we add a bunch of that to our current situation, it also contributes to why it's such a struggle to make a decision for ourselves today. I think I've worked with any number of clients who definitely don't want to repeat their parents' situation. And that might be that they were all clear that there was infidelity in the marriage and nobody did anything about it. There wasn't any help for it. Nobody left and they stayed, and it was clear that there was a lot of pain and anger perhaps that was laid out in the family system because of everyone's disappointment with how marriage was looking. And so if that's a situation, a wife might decide, I don't want to do that for me. And so my quick, easy decision to do this differently would be to leave, with maybe not thinking through where all of this pain is coming from.
And the opposite could be true too, right? Like if they saw their parents just divorce quickly and they know the pain of that, then they may want to say, I'm going to stay no matter what.
Yeah, yeah. Knowing that as a child of that situation, what they might have liked for their parents to do differently. Absolutely.
Well, I think that brings up one of the things that I hear so often about why it's such a struggle to know what to do, and that is about how the spouse's decision impacts the children. And I think it ties into exactly what we're talking about. Maybe it does come out of what she experienced growing up, one way or the other. I think there are so many that only approach this to believe that there's no other healthy choice than but to stay for the children. And I want to be quick to say that sometimes that is the healthiest thing. I also want to acknowledge that sometimes the healthiest choice is to leave, or to leave for a while, right? And that's healthy for the children. Maybe it's toxic, or maybe the children are watching their mom, in this case, not draw healthy boundaries. And we hear those stories, right? We hear those years down the road where the mom is surprised when her adult children say, hey, I need to tell you that I'm so sad or angry or frustrated that you didn't leave sooner. So we don't want to approach this by saying there are easy answers either way. But I think it's important to talk about the children because that's a huge piece of why this can be so challenging.
I just thought of one other thing that made my decision hard. And, that was that I think there was a fear of having to carry this identity the rest of my life. Once Mark was identified as a sex addict, and I'm thinking, so we get to go around and be the sex addict couple, wherever we go, and that's how people will think about us. And, sometimes that was just overwhelming, and actually it created a lot of shame for me, speaking about shame, which we talked about earlier. And of course, my belief system as time went on, and as we did get help, changed dramatically. And what I found was that wasn't a truth. And, while we were getting help and why we were in this recovery program, we were all seen and somewhat identified by that, but it didn't identify who we were as persons. And so that was very, excuse me, go ahead, Susie.
I'm sorry, I can't see.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned shame, Debbie, because I wanted to mention that before we ran out of time here, that in that first early part, when I think about why it was such a struggle for me to know what to do, I was engulfed in a horrible amount of shame, which led me to really unhealthy isolation. And in my own knowledge base and past experience, I had no idea what to do. But that shame kept me really isolated for a period of time until I was willing to take the risk to ask for help, see a counselor, talk to a trusted friend, those kinds of things.
So that's kind of interesting to even explore in our own journeys, isn't it? Is why are we feeling so much shame when it's our spouses who have been, engulfed in the sexual choices? So a great thing for us to start working on when we get into our own counseling.
And a great question to end this first podcast on. You guys have got a great sense of timing there. Greg, were you going to say something else?
I would just add finally that what I become aware of is how complex the decision is. Mm-hmm. And for a spouse that's confronted with new information or just is becoming more aware of her pain in a situation she's been aware of, there is just a complexity in whatever decision that she makes. So thanks for being here. We are going to continue this conversation in 2 more podcasts. So join us next time as we continue to talk about the complexity of wives and navigating these difficult seasons.
And we invite you to visit the Faithful and True channel on YouTube. It's a new video channel for us here at Faithful and True, and it's all available by going to our website, faithfulandtrue.com. Click on the podcast, and you'll have access to both the audio and the video versions of our podcast. We're excited about this new expansion of our ministry here. So, Beth, thank you very much for joining us today. Debbie, Elizabeth, Susie, and Greg, you. It's hard to put in. It's hard to put into words how dynamic you and I were today. So until we join you again next week, we hope that you will have a week that is filled with many blessings and great vision.